The business and the house are going to me. She simply receives the dolls. I wanted to hurl something at Sebastian's immaculately styled head because of the smug satisfaction with which his voice reverberated throughout the lawyer's office. The whole family burst out laughing, as though my inheritance were some sort of complex joke. As they disregarded everything I had fought for over the last 10 years, I sat there in my plain black dress, watching my brother revel in their praise. I'm Anna Wells, and I'm 32 years old. I've been the mainstay of our family's Portland, Oregon-based construction business, Timber Brewing, for the past 10 years. I was pulling 80-hour weeks, managing contracts, interacting with suppliers, and ensuring that our employees received their paychecks on time, while Sebastian partied his way through college and then traveled the world in his 20s on daddy's dime. However, it seems like nobody in this mahogany-paneled office cared about any of that. Anna always was daddy's little princess with her dollhouse collection, my Aunt Patricia added, wiping her eyes with a single-use tissue. I bit my tongue till I tasted blood, saying, at least Sebastian understands business. Sebastian is knowledgeable about business. The man who believed profit margins were something you scrawled in the margins of a notebook, who had never been on a construction site, and who couldn't differentiate a 2x4 from a steel beam. However, I maintained a neutral expression and folded my hands in my lap since I had long since realized that defending myself in front of this family was like attempting to argue with a pack of wolves. Sebastian straightened his pricey tie and went on. Anna can continue to play with her toys while I take care of the actual duties, I guess. Strong leadership was always needed in the firm, according to Father. Mr. Harrison, the attorney, cleared his throat gently. He was a gentle-eyed old man who had known our family for many years. A flicker of anticipation danced in my chest as I sat up taller due to something in his look. Actually, Mr. Harrison remarked, his tone piercing their laughing like a butter knife. He never owned the business. The room became so quiet that I could hear the hum of the air conditioner in the vents. In a heartbeat, Sebastian's expression changed from triumphant to perplexed. And a warm, perilous sensation spread through my chest. Something told me that, after years of being ignored, disregarded, and treated like the family's disappointment, things were going to change in a way that none of them could have predicted. As the youngest of the Wells family, I had to learn early on that people didn't really care what I thought. Thomas Wells, my father, was a bear of a man who began his construction business with just a single truck and a few tools. When I was 12 years old, my mother, Caroline, died, leaving me to fend for myself in the testosterone-heavy world of building sites and business meetings. Everyone believed that Sebastian, who was 5 years older and the golden boy, was bound for greatness. He dated the homecoming queen, played football in high school, and breezed through business school with mediocre grades that everyone assumed were great. I spent my adolescence on building sites, where I learned about the differences between different kinds of concrete and why foundation work was more important than gaudy finishes. My father used to say, Anna has a good head for numbers, as though having mathematics skills were a fun party trick rather than a useful business aptitude. She helps me stay organized. But I believe he realized deep down that it was more than that. I stepped up when Sebastian said he wanted to take a year-long backpacking trip throughout Europe to discover who he was after graduating from college. I saved the relationship when our largest client threatened to terminate a $1 million contract due to poor communication. I changed our benefits package and persuaded 3 important employees to stay after we were on the verge of losing them to a rival. I had gained knowledge about zoning regulations, how to interpret building drawings, and how to bargain with union officials. Within minutes of entering any of our job sites, I could identify any safety infractions, problems with quality, or scheduling conflicts. In contrast, Sebastian had only ever been to 2 building sites in his life. Additionally, he had grumbled about getting his shoes muddy on both occasions. At family get-togethers, my father would say, Sebastian will take over when I retire, and everyone would nod in agreement. He carries the leadership gene from Wells. I regarded what they perceived as leadership as charm-coated laziness. Sebastian was able to court customers at elegant meals, but he was unable to read a contract. He spoke assuredly and looked nice in a suit when discussing market positioning and synergy, but he had no idea how much it really cost to construct a house or pour a foundation. But I continued to work. I continued to resolve issues, handle emergencies, and cultivate connections with our subcontractors and suppliers. I promised myself that one day the family would see how much I had given up for the company we all professed to love, and that my contributions would be acknowledged. In retrospect, when I sat in that lawyer's office and watched in startled silence as everyone stared at Mr. Harrison, I understood that my father had witnessed it all along. Whether he had taken action or not was the question. 3 months before now, on the night in the lawyer's office, my father passed away. In the hospital room, I was the one holding his hand. Sebastian was attending a conference in Miami, which was most likely more of a vacation than a work trip. Additionally, the funeral plans had already been finalized by the time he returned via plane. In those last days, my father had whispered, "You've been my right hand all these years," during one of his lucid moments. "Nobody knows this business as well as you do." I gave him a firm grip and assured him that everything would be all right and that he shouldn't worry about his job. "Anna," he had said, his voice so low I had to bend closer to hear him, "the dolls, your grandmother's collection." He continued to look toward his briefcase in the room's corner, the one that never left his side during business hours, but there was something in his eyes, a weight that made it seem like he wanted to say more. Not simply sentiment. I believed at the time that he was referring to the emotional meaning of the antiques. My grandmother's collection of dolls had been handed down through the years, and although I had always thought they were a little eerie, I recognized their historical significance. They were exquisite pieces, some from the 1800s, made by artists whose work was becoming more and more scarce, but now, as I watched Mr. Harrison carefully go through his documents, I started to question whether there had been more to my father's remarks than I had realized. Sebastian's voice cracked slightly as he demanded, "The business ownership. What do you mean it was never in his name?" Mr. Dr. Harrison brought out a thick folder and adjusted his spectacles. "Your father transferred ownership of Timberlin Brewing to Anna 5 years ago. Since then, she has been the company's legal owner, though the change was kept secret at Mr. Wells's request." The room seemed to get thicker, and even though I could feel my pulse beating against my chest, I managed to maintain a deliberately neutral expression. "That's impossible," Sebastian responded, but his voice lacked confidence. "I'm his son. 5 years ago, while I was overseeing the biggest deal in our company's history, Sebastian had made the decision to spend 6 months in Thailand studying his spiritual side." Mr. Harrison went on calmly. "The business has been owned by Anna since 2019. I'm supposed to inherit the business. The will you're inheriting today pertains to Mr. Wells's personal assets, including the house, his personal investments, and various family heirlooms." Sebastian's face had become pale, and for the first time in my adult life, he was looking at me with what may have been respect. I could see the family exchange bewildered looks around me, their previous excitement curdling into worry. Or perhaps it was fear. "This must be some sort of error," Sebastian shouted, his voice increasing in desperation. "Anna has no business management experience. She only serves as the bookkeeper." After 10 years of being written off as just the bookkeeper, the moment of truth had finally come. I watched Sebastian's face go through phases of disbelief, anger, and increasing panic as the truth of his predicament set in. The words struck me like a physical blow, but instead of anger, I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Mr. Harrison pulled out a legal paper large enough to serve as a doorstop and stated, "I assure you there's no mistake. Since September 15, 2019, Miss Wells has been the only owner and operator of Timberlin Brewing. Your father made this transfer to safeguard the company from any creditors and to guarantee that it would continue to run under knowledgeable leadership. Management with experience." Even though I hadn't said the words, they still tasted good in my mouth. I had endured his patronizing lectures on business principles I had grasped before he learned to balance a checkbook. Watched Sebastian claim credit for projects I had overseen from beginning to end. And listened to him talk over me in meetings for years. Sebastian objected, but I went to business school, as though his degree were more important than my 10 years of real-world experience. I received a 2 on my MBA from Portland State. I muttered softly, 8 GPA, for the first time since Mr. Harrison's shocking revelation. Because you kept taking semesters off to discover who you were, you took 5 years to finish the program. The family turned to look at me as though I had wings out of thin air. My cousin Jake genuinely dropped his coffee cup, and Aunt Patricia's mouth dropped wide. There was no one to clean it up, yet it clattered against the wooden floor. My stepmother Diane said, Anna, with a harsh tone. You're right, I said, getting out of my chair for the first time since we had entered the room. That's no way to talk to your brother. I should probably refer to him by his correct title. As Timberlin Brewing's owner, Sebastian, I would like to properly thank you for your years of insignificant contributions to the development of our business. Sebastian's hands were trembling as he took in what I had spoken. The golden kid, who had always had it all, was now confronted with the fact that his connections and charisma would not be enough to keep him safe. He remarked, "This is ridiculous." His voice, however, was not confident as usual. My father had no idea that I would take over. We discussed it frequently. You mentioned it. I clarified. He listened. Something is different. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat tactfully. Maybe I should go over the entire extent of the business transfer. Your father was meticulous in his documentation, Miss Wells. Do you want me to go on reading the details? I nodded, resettling myself in my chair, feeling for the first time in years that I was right at home. The transfer encompassed all firm assets, contracts, equipment, and intellectual property, Mr. Harrison added. And the family sat around me in astonished silence, forgetting their earlier glee as they tried to comprehend how totally they had misjudged the situation. Sebastian made a choking noise, and I looked at him and noticed that his face had turned from pale to green around the edges. Miss Wells also took on all business debts and obligations, which she has been successfully managing for the past 5 years. Under her direction, the company's value has increased by about 40%. Now, Mr. Harrison said, should we proceed with the personal estate distribution? That 40% growth wasn't luck or coincidence but the product of careful planning, strategic investments, and countless 18-hour days that he had never bothered to acknowledge. Sebastian inherited the family home, which sounded amazing until Mr. Harrison brought up the $300,000 outstanding mortgage bill. The personal estate reading was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Additionally, he was given my father's personal investments, which had been heavily depleted in recent years to fund Sebastian's numerous business endeavors and long vacations. The antique doll collection, Mr. Harrison declared, goes to Anna, together with all related records and appraisals. Although it sounded more like a bark than a humorous chuckle, Sebastian did laugh. See, I told you she gets the dolls, he said. Some things make sense, at least. I maintained a neutral face, but I was nearly pulsing with excitement on the inside. My dad's remark that the dolls weren't merely sentimental was beginning to make perfect sense. He had spoken of documentation and appraisals in his last days, things that had sounded unimportant at the time. I said slowly, Mr. Harrison, could you tell me more about the appraisals? The elderly lawyer smiled, and I caught a hint of mischief in his eyes. Certainly. The 47 items in your grandmother's collection include a whole set of early Madame Alexander collectibles and many rare Jumbo dolls from the 1870s. The collection was evaluated at $512,000. In the most recent appraisal, which was finished last year, the ensuing hush was so total that I could hear the rumbling of someone's stomach. Sebastian looked at me as if he had just discovered that he had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, and his laughter died in his throat. Aunt Patricia muttered, $500,000. For dolls? According to Mr. Harrison, antique dolls are significant investments. The collection was started in the 1920s by Miss Wells's great-grandmother, and each succeeding generation has added thoughtfully chosen items. Anna's understanding of the history and significance of the collection made your father very proud. I was the family member who had always listened to my grandmother's tales about each doll, assisted her in learning about their provenance, and kept them in good condition. I had been studying workmanship, historical relevance, and market appraisal while Sebastian had been rolling his eyes and cracking jokes about eerie old toys. Sebastian answered slowly, his voice taut with hardly contained panic, "So, let me understand this. I get a property with a huge mortgage, and Anna gets a business worth millions plus $500,000 in antiques." Diane replied feebly, as though a 10-year-old pickup truck might somehow balance the scales, "You also get father's car." According to Mr. Harrison's notes, the Timberlin Brewing Company was valued at $2. As of last month, $3 million. For the past 5 years, Miss Wells has been the company's majority owner and has been in charge of its operations, finances, and strategic planning. I saw Sebastian mentally perform the calculations. His expression fluctuated between realization and defeat. $3 million for the company, plus $500,000 for the dolls, plus the fulfillment that comes from being acknowledged for my real achievements at last. In the meantime, he was examining a pickup truck that required a new transmission and a house that he could not afford to keep. "This can't be legal," he shouted frantically. "There must be something we can do," Anna said, deceiving him in some way. "Actually," I said as I straightened my skirt and got back up. "It's probably time for me to go into detail about how this occurred." I started to like how everyone leaned forward in spite of themselves 5 years ago. While I was overseeing the Patterson Heights development project, Sebastian was in Thailand, locating his spiritual core. "Sebastian, do you not recall that one? The $20 million transaction nearly failed due to problems with permits." Sebastian's gaze raced over the room, searching for oncoming support. The Patterson Heights project was the greatest success story in our company's history. Therefore, everyone remembers it. As I went on, our lawyer learned that one of our subcontractors was getting ready to file a lawsuit that could have bankrupted us. I spent 3 months working with city planners, environmental consultants, and zoning committees to resolve problems that could have cost us everything, I said. "Your father was facing possible personal liability that could have extended to his personal assets, including the family home," Mr. Harrison said, nodding. I recalled the talk as vividly as if it had occurred yesterday. "So, he called me into his office," I remarked. "Transferring ownership to someone who truly understood the business's operations was the solution," he claimed. After observing me manage progressively more complicated responsibilities and wanting to safeguard the family and the company. "But why didn't he tell us?" Diane's voice had lost its angry tone, but she still inquired. I answered, "Because he knew exactly how you would react, in the same way that you're stunned that Anna might be able to manage something more complex than a lemonade stand." Sebastian's voice returned at last. I answered, "He didn't give it away," and for the first time, I let some sarcasm enter my voice. "This is crazy. You can't just give away a multi-million-dollar company without discussing it with the family." Every 18-hour day, every issue I resolved, every connection I made with our suppliers and customers, I earned it. While you were sharing Instagram pictures from beach resorts, I was ensuring our employees had places to return to. I took out my own folder, which I had brought along but had not anticipated needing. I have 5 years' worth of financial records that demonstrate the growth of the business under my direction. I have client, supplier, and employee testimonials. I have records of every significant decision I've made. And I have documentation of every issue I've resolved. Mr. Harrison appeared impressed. "Your father said you were meticulous, but I had no idea you had so many records. I was taught early on that in this family you have to record everything if you want anyone to think you truly did it," I said, casting a thoughtful glance at Sebastian. The room fell silent once more, but this time it felt different. Too many times I watched someone else take credit for my work, rather than the stunned stillness that occurs when people take in unexpected information. This was the awkward silence that followed people's realization that they had been mistaken about something basic. Sebastian's voice was hardly audible above a whisper when he inquired, "So what happens now?" I glanced at my brother, a man who had never questioned his right to inherit what our father had created and who had coasted on charm and family ties for 37 years. I nearly felt terrible for him for a second. I said. Now, just like me, you figure out how to make your own way in the world. After gathering my documents, I got up and prepared to leave the office, where I had just been recognized as one of Portland's wealthiest young ladies. However, I made one more spin around before I got to the door. Oh, and Sebastian, at this time, the company is not hiring. The will reading's aftermath was everything I could have imagined and more. As Aunt Patricia and Diane were ranting in the hallway about unfair surprises and ungrateful children, Sebastian staggered out of Mr. Harrison's office looking like he had been struck by a freight train. With my head held high and the folder containing 5 years of proof that I had earned every cent of my inheritance in hand, I strode past them all. "Hold on, Anna." When I arrived at the elevator, Sebastian called after me. His once cocky tone had vanished, and in its stead was a sound that sounded almost desperate. "This is something we must discuss." I turned to look at him, seeing that his flawless hair suddenly looked unkempt and his pricey suit looked shabby. "Sebastian, what specifically are you interested in discussing? How come you never inquired about my job? How could you think you were entitled to inherit a company that you never bothered to learn about? Or how, in front of our whole family, you have insulted my IQ for the past hour?" He seemed to realize that any response he provided would only make matters worse, as he opened his mouth and then closed it again. "What's funny is that I went on and entered the elevator. "In fact, I would have been open to cooperating with you. We could have been partners if you had ever taken the time to learn about the company or even just had a little respect for what I do. However, you were too preoccupied with receiving everything to realize that the labor was being done by someone else." Sebastian made a feeble attempt to follow me as the elevator door began to close, but I waved my hand. "Don't," I firmly said. "You've long since made up your mind. You made the decision to ignore me and act as though my contributions were unimportant. You now have to deal with the fallout." I saw Sebastian's reflection in the shiny doors as the elevator lowered down. In the corridor, he stood by alone, surrounded by relatives who were staring at him with the same mix of sympathy and sadness that they had before shown me. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my freshly remodeled office at the headquarters of Timberlin Brewing, going over plans for expansion that Sebastian's anticipated leadership would not have been able to carry out. I still got a tiny thrill every time I looked at the owner and CEO nameplate on my desk. My helper rapped on the door. "Sebastian Wells is here to visit you, Miss Wells. He's your brother," he says. The architectural blueprint that was strewn across my conference table caught my attention. Our newest construction site, where we were constructing a sustainable housing development that would be highlighted in the Portland Business Journal next month, was visible from the window of my office. I was in charge of the project's design, vision, and accountability. I said to send him in. Sebastian came into my office with the appearance of someone who hadn't had much sleep in weeks. In addition to his rumpled clothing and disheveled hair, he possessed the disheartened stance of someone who has finally run out of alternatives. He said, "Nice office," but there was no genuine gratitude in his voice. I didn't bother to get up or give him a chair when he said, "I heard you're expanding into green construction." "We are," I said. "We are positioned to lead the region in sustainable building methods in this expanding market." He nodded slowly as he looked at the architectural qualifications I had obtained while he was out touring the world, the trophies on my walls, and the pictures of finished projects. "I need a job," he finally remarked to Anna. I became aware that this was the moment I had been subconsciously waiting for as the words lingered between us. The golden kid, Sebastian Wells, who had never worked a day in his life, was requesting a job from his younger sister. I said, "I'm sorry," and I meant it. After the will reading, Sebastian's life rapidly fell apart as news of the drastic turn of events at Timberlin Brewing traveled throughout Portland's business world. "But we're not hiring." When others discovered that he had anticipated inheriting a business that his sister had actually been running for years, his reputation as a potential business leader fell apart. When he attempted to work for development or construction companies who were aware of the Wells family background, his lack of actual experience became glaringly apparent. He was forced to work as a sales assistant at a car dealership while he struggled to make mortgage payments on a property he couldn't afford to maintain since the family home became an unmanageable financial burden. Knowing that his years of ignoring her contributions had cost him everything he had hoped to inherit, Sebastian was forced to relocate into a tiny apartment within 6 months and observe from a distance as his sister grew the company he had taken for granted. I considered how Sebastian's years of derision had unintentionally prepared me for this moment as I signed the contract for our fourth significant expansion project. His persistent rejection of my skills had compelled me to record every accomplishment, substantiate every argument, and establish the kind of extensive record that, when the truth came to light, placed my ownership beyond dispute, teaching me that letting people realize that the person they underestimated was in charge all along may sometimes be the most fulfilling kind of retaliation.